Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello to you all. Good morning. So as you heard there, biodiversity loss and the biodiversity emergency is a long-term issue. It's something that is with us here today, but also the decisions we make as a society now will have impacts for generations to come. And so I want to encourage you as you have your discussions this weekend and the weekends to come to take the long view, to think about that question of, how can we be good ancestors? How can we be remembered well by the generations to come? I want to say a little bit more about that now, first by introducing you to my children. Now, at the end of 2019, at the time of the last UK general election, that's where I live, my wife and I decided to give our twins, who just turned 11, we decided to give them an unusual birthday present. We decided to give them our votes. So we all sat around the kitchen table, as you can see there, and we debated the party manifestos and the electoral system, and they then told us where to put the X on the ballot sheet. And in case you're wondering, they didn't exactly follow their parents' political opinions. Close, but not quite. Now, why did we do that? We did it, of course, because we know that the interests of our children and their children and so on are not really represented very well in our politics, in our economics. And we need to think about how we can get out of the short-term cycles that we're caught in. We know that most of our politicians can hardly see beyond the next election or even the latest tweet. That businesses can't see beyond the quarterly report. That governments sit around international conference tables arguing with each other while the planet burns and species disappear. And of course, as individuals, we're constantly on our phones and clicking the buy now button. This is the age of the tyranny of the now, the domination of the present moment. And of course, we know we need more long-term thinking to deal with lots of different problems in society, to be planning for the next pandemic on the horizon, to deal with wealth inequality which gets passed on from generation to generation, to deal with threats from new technologies like artificial intelligence, but of course to deal with the global ecological emergency, climate change, biodiversity loss, and issues like that. And the way I think about this is that, in a way, we dump these problems, these ecological problems and these technological risks, we dump them on future generations as if there's nobody there in the future. And I think it's really well represented by this cartoon you can see there. There's all the stuff that we dump, climate change, environmental problems, toxic waste, and this is really the situation. That's the crap we inherited, that's our crap, we'll let the grandkids sort it out. I think that's kind of how we look at this. But it's quite difficult, I think, to grasp the scale of this problem. And I find it helpful to look at this diagram, which is from my book, The Good Ancestor, which is called the scale of unborn generations. Now, there in the little green circle is everyone alive today, the living, nearly 8 billion of us. Now, if we get really long-term here and go back 50,000 years, an estimated 100 billion people have been born and died. But if you go forward 50,000 years, assuming this century's birth rates stabilize, level off, nearly 7 trillion people will be born. So there in that big orange circle are all your grandchildren, then their grandchildren, and the friends and communities on whom they'll depend. In the next 2 centuries alone, tens of billions of people will be born. So there's a real question there of how are they going to remember us for what we did or didn't do when we had the chance? And someone who really thought about this issue a lot was the immunologist Jonas Salk, who you might know in the 1950s developed the first polio vaccine. And in later life, he said that the great question facing humanity is this: are we being good ancestors? In other words, if we're going to preserve the natural world for future generations, we need to think about how they'll remember us. And he believed that if we were going to be good ancestors, we need to start thinking much more long-term, not just on the scale of seconds and minutes and hours, but on the scale of years, decades, even centuries. And the good news is actually, human beings are quite good at this. We actually have a history, a tradition of being able to think long-term about various issues. Just think about what's sometimes called cathedral thinking. Oops, let me go back. Cathedral thinking, which is the idea of embarking on projects with very long time horizons. And that idea of cathedral thinking comes from the first medieval cathedrals and religious buildings that were built, and ones like St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, when the first foundation stones were laid in the 12th century. Those who laid those stones probably knew that the building would never be finished within their own lifetimes. That's the kind of long-term vision which we can aspire to, in a way. But we also see this in scientific projects. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which is collecting millions of seeds in an indestructible rock bunker in the Arctic Circle that's designed to last for 1,000 years. So it's like a botanical Noah's Ark, preserving the world's plant biodiversity. But we also bring long-term thinking into decision-making, and there's lots of great innovations. In Japan, there's this organization I love called Future Design, and it's a bit like a citizens' assembly. What they do is they invite local people to discuss and draw up plans for the towns and cities where they live. And they typically divide them into two groups. Half of them are told they're residents from the present day, and the other half are given these beautiful kind of kimono-like ceremonial gowns to wear, and I have one here. This is from the small town of Yahaba, northern Japan, population 30,000. And the residents who are given the gowns to wear are told to imagine themselves as being residents from the year 2060, okay, so to project themselves forward a few decades. And it turns out the residents from 2060 systematically advocate for more transformative plans when it comes to dealing with the biodiversity loss or climate change or problems with an aging population, many issues. And this future design movement is spreading throughout Japan. It's used in big cities and government ministries. So I'd just like to invite you that when you're having your discussions this weekend, to maybe try and put yourself in the shoes of those future generations and imagine you're almost giving advice to the politicians of the present day. But I realize that it can be quite hard to make that connection with the generations to come. And in order to do that, I like to take you through a short thought experiment. It's just going to take a couple of minutes. It's called Human Layers. Now, in order to do this, I'd love you all to please stand up, if you could. If you can't stand and you want to keep sitting, you can, but ideally stand up and make sure you've got a little bit of space in front of you, okay? So just do what I do. So I'd like you just to close your eyes for a moment. Just take a deep breath. And I want you to imagine, with your eyes shut, the face of a young person in your life who you really care about. It could be a nephew or niece or your own child or grandchild. Just picture their face for a moment. And now just take a little step forward. You've now traveled 30 years into the future. Again, picture their face, now 30 years on. Think for a moment about the joys that that person might be facing or the struggles they might be facing in their life. And now just take a small final step forward. It's now their 90th birthday party. They're 90 years old and they're surrounded by family and friends and loved ones and old work colleagues. Go and have a look out the window. What kind of world do you see out there? Imagine you're looking at a part of the Irish landscape that you love. What kind of state is it in all those decades into the future? And now you come back into the room, and this 90-year-old stands up and is about to give a birthday speech, but suddenly they see a photograph of you, their departed dead ancestor, over on the table. And they decide to tell the gathered room about something that you did to be a good ancestor, something that you did to help their generation and the planet they live on. Just think for a moment, with your eyes still shut, about what they said about you. And now just open your eyes again, and please do sit down. Now, I know that doing an exercise like that can be quite confronting for some people, particularly if you've got a dark, dystopian vision of the future. But it's all about trying to think about the kind of legacies we want to leave, the kind of connections we all have to generations in the past, to grandparents, but also to grandchildren and beyond that. And I think it's important to recognize that when we're thinking about legacies, we need to think about our ecological legacies too. We know that the ecological future of Ireland, as you will hear today and tomorrow in the talks to come, is as fragile as the wings on of this dragonfly here. And so there's a question there of what are we going to do to leave a positive legacy for that ecological future? And someone who's really inspired me to think about this issue is a designer and biologist called Janine Benyus, spelled B-E-N-Y-U-S, inventor of the idea of something called biomimicry. I want to play you a very wise 1-minute clip from her, which I found very helpful. So here's Janine Benyus.
You know, the answers we seek, the secrets to a sustainable world, are literally all around us. And if we choose to truly mimic life's genius, the future I see would be beauty and abundance, and certainly fewer regrets. You know, in the natural world, the definition of success is the continuity of life. You keep yourself alive and you keep your offspring alive. That's success. But it's not the offspring in this generation. Success is keeping your offspring alive 10,000 generations and more. And that presents a conundrum because you're not going to be there to take care of your offspring 10,000 generations from now. So what organisms have learned to do is to take care of the place that's going to take care of their offspring. Life has learned to create conditions conducive to life. And that's really the magic heart of it. Life creates conditions conducive to life. And that's also the design brief for us right now. We have to learn how to do that. And luckily, we're surrounded by the answers. And, you know, millions of species willing to gift us with their best ideas.
And I love what she says there, because she's basically saying, as I understand it, that if we want to learn from nature, we've got 3.8 billion years of nature to learn from. Well, how have other species survived for 10,000 generations or more, whether they're bats or beavers or birds? By taking care of the place that will take care of their offspring, by not fouling the nest, by living within the boundaries of the ecosystem in which they're embedded. And if we want to do the same as a species, humankind, we need to do that. But of course, we're doing the opposite. We know that we're breaking through boundaries of dangerous biodiversity loss and climate change and ocean acidification. So we need to learn to live within those boundaries, to take care of the place that our children will inherit, and their children, and so on. In a way, that's the trick. It's about caring. Long-term thinking is all about caring about place, in a way. And that's exactly what you're talking about. But let me now just leave you with a final thought. This is a quote from Chief Oren Lyons, a Native American community leader from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or sometimes called the Iroquois. He says this, he says, "We are looking ahead, as is one of the first mandates given us as chiefs, to make sure that every decision we make relates to the welfare and the well-being of the 7th generation to come. And that is the basis by which we make decisions in council. Will this be to the benefit of the 7th generation?" And this idea of 7th generation decision-making is found in many communities around the world, but I think it's something that you can bring into your discussions in this Citizens' Assembly. It's a philosophy of ecological stewardship. It's about leaving the world in a better state than which you inherited, about passing on the gift of creation to the generations to come. So let me just finish by saying that as you're having your discussions today and tomorrow, try and maybe imagine those future generations are sitting here at the table with you, maybe almost in an empty chair. Try and keep in your mind that question, are we being good ancestors? As you're dealing with the complexities of all the issues that you're facing, give a voice to those future generations. Let them into the room. Let them speak. And I believe that if you do that, you will have an extraordinary conversation and you will be leaving the world a better place than we've all found it. Thank you very much.